Well, hi, Sally.
Hi, Sally.
Well, we're back today. While Mars is spending a lot of time in Gemini, which astrologer John Marcusella said is a time when a lot of brothers are going to be in the news. And so we decided to focus on some brothers who we've been reading about over the past couple of months. Maybe, Sally, you can tell us about them.
Well, I think they're obviously really familiar to us. They've been in the news. We're old enough to be their mothers, hopefully not their grandmothers.
Yeah.
Um, we were always familiar with the Charles and Diana story and the two young um, sons. And I think we have a lot of memories and watching them grow up in the media, don't you think?
Yeah, William and Harry are kind of welded together in our memories, those two young boys walking behind their mother's coffin. And so in the past few years, things have not been going smoothly between them. I guess that's fair to say, wouldn't you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think we're going to or I think we all understand that boys grow up and brothers grow up, and sometimes their paths don't necessarily align. But obviously it's quite dramatic with these two because there's so much in the public eye.
Right, and they've been so much on stage lately for first the Queen's Jubilee and then sadly the Queen's funeral. And so that story is, are Harry and William getting along? Are they having harsh words? Are their wives fighting? All these questions are there. And so we thought we'd take a look at their synastry to see what's going on between them and then answer the question, will they eventually patch things up? So why don't we start
We
with,
have the answers, don't we, Sally?
yeah, let's hope. Okay, so let's see. We're going to share William's chart first.
Okay.
Let's see. Pull up Prince William's chart. And let's see, do you see that?
Not quite yet.
Okay, let me do a new share here. How about that?
Yes.
Okay,
There it is.
so this is William's chart, and he was born at a new moon and also a solar eclipse, which is significant. And when I pulled up his chart today, it occurred to me he has Cancer Sun, Sagittarius rising, just like his mother.
Okay, I knew that, or I thought that Diana had the Cancer Sun, so they have that Sagittarius connection as well.
Yeah, yeah. And she had, I think, did she have a Taurus moon? I think she did, which is what Harry has. So,
I think she is an Aquarian moon. Aquarian.
oh, okay.
We'll have to double check that, but I
Yeah.
think
But interesting. And William does favor her, don't you think? When you look at him, you very much see her.
I think he does. And although supposedly Harry's red hair and looks came from Diana's side of the family, there
Oh, okay. The
are some
Spencers.
redheads. Although I remember seeing a photo of Prince Philip that looked exactly like Harry,
Oh,
in Philip's younger years, obviously. And
it
maybe
is
it was,
interesting how
yeah,
sometimes
when
the
he was
look
in the
will
Navy. Yeah. And,
skip.
he was
Yeah.
bearded like Harry. So, you never know. But
Yeah.
yeah, William is definitely that double Cancer. And,
Mhm.
it's so interesting because he was born at 9 p.m. At night, on the summer solstice, it looks like, right?
Yeah, yeah, shortly after the solstice. So definitely an aspect for a future king, don't you think? Very dramatic. Um,
Well, he's also got, yeah, that Jupiter on the midheaven. So that would
mhm,
be a signature for that.
mhm.
And then with his fourth house in Pisces, ruled by Jupiter, then that gives another emphasis of the whole family heritage
Yeah,
and his destiny.
for sure. And then when we're looking at the signification, like if we want to know, if we want information about the siblings in someone's chart, we look to the third house. And if any planets are in there, we would count them. But of course, in William's case, we see that it's ruled by Saturn, because Aquarius is on the cusp. So Saturn is what's going to tell us about his relationship with siblings and how he feels about them. So I don't know, what do you think about Saturn being a sibling indicator? What are some of the key words that would um, kind of that would tell us if you have Saturn on your house of siblings?
Well, I think you're going to be, you know, communicating structure and maybe being more of an authority
Mm.
in the authority position over your sibling.
Oh yeah, I like that. Yeah.
And obviously, looking at William's chart here with the Mars conjunct
Yeah.
Saturn.
So here's his Saturn. Yeah, you might think of that Saturn ruling the third house too, and that feeling of responsibility.
More, yes, responsibility, more serious, um, you know, and I think, let's see, isn't his Saturn, yeah, his Saturn, well, we haven't seen Harry's chart yet, but we'll look at
Yeah.
that, but we'll look at Harry's Venus in a moment, because I think it's conjunct.
Yeah, when we look at the synastry. And so you have to think, well, this is the brother planet, Saturn. And of course, I don't know, in the 11th house, do you think he would be looking at his brother as a friend?
That's a good point. You know, I think they've kind of relied on each other, and particularly after the death of their mother, I'm sure, you know, it would have been even more devastating if William, for instance, had been an only child and was
Yeah.
share that with his brother. Although I guess Harry in more recent interviews has said he kept a lot of his feelings to himself, perhaps, and that was hurtful. But yes, I would say in the 11th house, that makes sense.
Yeah, that he would look upon his brother as a friend. And because Saturn's exalted in the Venus ruled sign of Libra, that he would really esteem his brother, do you think? Really value his company and enjoy being with him?
I mean, I think that's a good signature. And again, we'll look at when we look at the two charts together, we'll see how they they do have these connections for sure.
Yeah. And then, of course, one thing we see, Mars is approaching Saturn. So the malefic, this is the dominant malefic in William's chart. So you can think of, even though he really esteems his brother and has a good time with him and feels responsible for him, I think the potential for conflict is there, don't you think?
Yes.
But an exalted Saturn though is pretty strong. So I think we're seeing him really caring for his brother. And I think it's interesting too that it's Aquarius, not Capricorn, on the third house too, because an Aquarian is someone who is very interested in rules and protocol that they themselves set up. Someone who's Capricorn is more Saturn and Capricorn, that's more following the rules, being with the structure. But you can see William, in this sense of responsibility to Harry, might have some very strong ideas on how he thinks Harry should conduct his life. Does that sound fair?
That's a good point. Yeah, and I was just thinking with the Saturn in Libra, relationships are very important to William, and it's something that he values and is going to work on.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we've got a picture then of
I was going to add that William, with that double Cancer, he is a very sensitive individual, and also I think he has the Neptune conjunct his ascendant, so he's much more sensitive than maybe he perhaps comes across, although he definitely comes across as a family man, and he said that in interviews.
Right, with that sun moon in Cancer, close to the North Node. Yeah, definitely tribal. He likes the people that he's known forever. In fact, isn't Kate like his wife Kate was a school chum from,
Hmm.
they were junior high or high school age.
Well, I think actually they met in college, but I
Oh,
believe it
okay.
was their first year of college, and then they ended up dating for many, many years before they actually got married.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's somebody he knew a long time and was
Mhm.
comfortable with.
But family obviously is really important to William.
Yeah.
So, obviously his brother is his family too.
Yeah. And those of us who grew up when we did, when your parents were home a lot with you, it's a little different than when you're like William and Harry and their um, kind of
Mm.
social class. You don't have mom and dad at home with you all the time.
And they went to boarding schools, obviously lost their mother at an early age, and their parents were involved in all these engagements. So, and they had nannies.
Yeah, so you can imagine that when William thinks of family, Harry as his family would be very, very precious to him.
Mhm. And they're very close in age too.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. 84 and 81, right? Just a little less
Hmm.
than 3 years apart. Okay, so now Harry's chart, again, we do not have any planets in the third house, but he's got a Jupiter ruled third house. So I don't know, what do you think that is different from a Saturn ruled third house?
Well, looking at his Jupiter in the first house, and it's interesting too, because his chart ruler is Saturn,
Mm,
being a Capricorn rising person. But certainly in his chart, you see the sun right up at the top.
mm-hmm.
And so it's a day chart. So Jupiter is the greater benefic,
Yeah, yeah. So
but it is in the fallen Capricorn. So it's a little bit weaker. But I think Jupiter, if you look at it as the ruler of the third house, if you look at Jupiter, involved with the third, that probably describes more perhaps his brother in that case. And Jupiter's the king. I
Oh,
mean,
that's
that
interesting.
that
Yeah.
thought occurs to me right away.
Who's your brother? My brother is the future king. Yeah.
He's the king. He's the king.
Yeah,
Um,
and then just that kind of generosity you think of with Jupiter being there, and just that sort of that fellow feeling, with his brother, that they would um, he would be really have really good feelings for his brother, I would think. And then yeah, just what about it being in the first house too, that Jupiter? So we've got the ruler of the third house in the first house, which makes it an important planet,
yeah, it's in a strong position being in the first house.
hmm
I mean, the characteristic of the generosity, but yeah, the first house applies also to himself too. And I remember hearing or reading something about they used to call Harry, or Diana did, good King Harry, because it would be hard to be sort of like the second banana. I mean, it always is in any sibling
mm
situation. I think there's the possibility of that tension there, but especially with William being the heir to the throne, um, that that might have been hard on Harry,
mm.
because maybe he had some aspirations to be first, number one in that first house as well.
Yeah, yeah. In today's, it used to be the oldest son always took precedence, and
And
he
got the
would hear,
property and
yeah.
the farm.
But now, the sons, no matter where they are in order in the family, are going to each make their own way. But, this is almost like an old, think about the Capricorn there, sort of this old system of primogeniture. And that the oldest son somehow is going to take precedence over all the other siblings. And so I think that speaks to what you're pointing out about it being in fall, don't you?
It's not as strong of a Jupiter, because of that. So it does show a weakness there, and in him being the king.
Yeah, and just not feeling as esteemed. Um, because the opposite, of course, is exalted. So in fall is that you feel, kind of like the redheaded stepchild, or you just don't feel like you have the status with Jupiter and Capricorn. And then when it's in your first house, tied up with identity, it just seems like that would dominate a lot of how he thought about himself. That, oh, I'm the spare, the heir and the spare, and the one who's just kind of hanging around. So it seems like he would have to fight for some feelings of self-worth. And he would fight for feelings of self-worth because that's Jupiter that wants to be big and generous and dominant. So, and also you think too, though, going back to the sort of Jupiter nature of his feeling towards his brother, do you think with it being in the first house, he might view his brother, especially when he was younger, as someone he kind of looked up to?
Well, I would think that he would, he probably wouldn't have a choice in that either, just because of the attention William would be getting, the big brother. I mean, I think most people do look up to their older sibling, but yeah, that could be a signature for that.
Yeah, that he looked up to him. And so it would have been difficult if William stepped forward and criticized him, don't you think? He would have found that very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so we've kind of looked at um, both of the brothers individually and kind of how they would perceive their siblings. And it seems like Harry has a little bit more complicated feelings about his brother than William does. Does that sound fair?
I would think, just even without looking at the chart, that would just be a given. But I think, like you've made a case, or we've made a case for that being a possibility. I mean, um, just now when you're looking at the synastry chart here, I'm kind of drawn to that sixth house there. So you've got William on the inside and Harry on the outside.
Right, Harry's the outer wheel.
And so you do see that Venus, William's Venus and Chiron conjunct Harry's moon. So he does have a sensitivity there to Harry's feelings and his just way of his emotional makeup.
Yeah, so that's a really strong bond between them. When somebody's moon is conjunct your Venus, especially in the Venus ruled sign of Taurus, and this is Venus in its own sign and the moon exalted, that really does show a strong bond, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah, and they both have very strong moons and Venuses, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
The mother and wife signatures in the chart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's one real point of contact between them. What do you think about Chiron in William's chart being there with his Venus?
Well, Chiron can symbolize wounding and healing. So yeah, it's not like a clean Venus, is it?
No, and because Harry's moon is there,
It's a very sensitive point.
yeah, it's like they could almost hurt each other. Do you think? With William's Chiron on Harry's moon, and then Harry's moon setting off the Venus Chiron contact. And, it's in the earth sign of Taurus, which is not a real verbal sign. So you can almost imagine vibes, sensing things that they don't really talk about, but just are there. And then Harry's Taurus moon is conjunct the North Node.
Right.
It's applying to the North Node. So, that shows Harry's sensitivity too, don't you think? That he's kind of sensitive to what is owed to him.
Well, yes. And, when you look at Harry's chart individually, that is in the the fifth house, and and that is where he needs to go, in that direction. His own family, his children,
Mhm.
his romantic life.
Yeah, that's a strong moon. And
So
it loves,
in a way, you know, you could look at it as William being supportive of that in terms of his Venus, but
mhm,
maybe it's sort of difficult for William. There's some woundedness in that, but maybe he does recognize that Harry needs, you know, maybe at some level that
mhm.
he does need to go in that direction, but it's kind of hard. You know, he doesn't want to let go of his brother,
Oh,
and
yeah.
probably his brother doesn't want to let go of him.
And then the other thing you had pointed out was that Harry's Venus, which is strong in Libra, unless they both have Venus in their own signs, is conjunct the brother planet in William's chart.
So that definitely gives a little bit of sting to that Venus, you know, from William. And I often think of the report that William very much cautioned Harry about slowing down his relationship with this girl, Megan, his wife. And the reports were in the media that Harry was hurt by that. And you could see where William has a point. You know, he wants to sustain the family and sustain the monarchy. And
Mhm.
who is this outsider, American divorcee, biracial woman? So, in a way, you can have some understanding and compassion for William's thought on that, but then that would be kind of hurtful to Harry. So again, that it does tie in with that wounding signature that we just talked about with the Venus Chiron there. In
Yeah, so we've got the Saturn Venus bond, which is being, it's kind of interesting. Mars in its detriment in Libra is applying to that bond. So, and Libra is the marriage planet. So that's kind of interesting that it's Harry's marriage, and in a sense, William's too, that really caused the breach between them.
and you're right, Saturn and Venus aren't necessarily a bad conjunction because it does show commitment, but maybe it is that Mars there that kind of,
Yeah, it's a testing,
yeah.
because a Saturn Venus connection like that could be very stable, don't you think?
Mhm,
Especially an exalted Saturn and a Venus in its own sign. But
mhm,
that maybe shows the bond they had all those years, when they lost their mother and their father was going through his drama and they had to rely on each other. That seems like that could be a real positive in their
mhm,
relationship.
mhm.
And that's William's kind of responsible older brother vibe, kind of reining in Harry and making sure he's okay. And I almost wonder with that Saturn on Harry's Venus if William even made efforts to fix him up with different women,
Mm.
that he would want Harry to kind of marry somebody in their own set that he knew and was. That's just
Yeah, I
speculation on
mean,
my part.
he dated at least a couple of women that were certainly featured in the media, and I think some of the women were basically scared off about the responsibility and the attention that they'd get, you know,
Hmm.
being a royal princess.
Yeah. So
Um, and
that's
he
a
was in the army for 10 years too, and so you kind of wonder how much time he had to date.
yeah.
I don't really know, but
And that's kind of another signature with his brother planet Mars, that his brother was in the military.
mhm.
But there's one other, well, there's a couple other aspects in the chart. This one, let's see, we'll do the Mercuries. What do you see about the Mercuries in the chart?
So yeah, so like their moons and Venuses, they each have a strong Mercury because uh, you know, Mercury is in domicile in both of them.
So they're both very intelligent, I would say, both very strong-minded, but
Exalted in Virgo for
mhm,
Aries too. But yeah, but they square each other, so they definitely must think differently on quite a few things, perhaps.
Yeah, well, Mercury and Gemini would be more, I don't know, open and curious, would you say? And
Yeah, I mean, Harry is a very earthy person, kind of practical, down to earth. And I think, um, William, yeah, he may be more airy, more communicative in some ways, although Harry is a good communicator too.
mhm.
So I've seen him, especially in these individual interviews where he's very open and honest and warm. I remember hearing that Diana, or reading that Diana said that, William didn't really want to be king necessarily because he's very private. So in some ways, I think William is more careful about what he says,
Mhm.
but he sort of has to be because of his position.
Yeah, and a Virgo in Mercury can slice things apart and really, I'm sorry, Mercury and Virgo can really slice things apart and be very critical. And so while William's just kind of bouncing along in this world he's always known, and he's just going to all these events and meeting people and doing his thing, Harry's kind of looking at it like, there's some things here I don't like. There are some things here that aren't right. That's what his interview with Oprah was about, and what this book he's going to write. And so while William is kind of just living his life, here's Harry kind of lobbing, you know, baseballs or something, something at him, like, hey, what about this isn't right? These people shouldn't be telling us what to do, or this
Mhm.
tradition is old fashioned. This doesn't relate to the people, just that critical, which if you put the two together, it could work very well. But you can see with them being at 90 degrees from each other, it would be difficult finding that place where you agree mentally. And so Mercury also is a sibling planet. So
Mhm.
Mercury does tell us something about a sibling in our chart. So that would almost make me wonder if, even though they've been close and relied on each other, if they've throughout the years sparred a bit, like siblings will do.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, so that's another point that we need to look at. But then back to that Jupiter, which is Harry's um, brother planet. And so that is,
Yeah, it's opposing William's sun and moon. on
yeah,
the road.
boy, that sure reinforces what we were saying, doesn't it, about um, Harry's feelings about being the kind of second banana.
Mhm.
That here's Harry over here, kind of considered he's the spare and the heir and the spare, and here's William, with the sun and the moon, and the moon is in its own sign of Cancer. With his inheritance, the eighth house of becoming king someday. And Harry's kind of over here like, well, what about me? Who am I? Where do I fit in this situation?
And when you look at the nodes in both charts, so, I think that's really an important thing to think about, because there are all these individuals who think, Harry just, made a mistake. He deserted the royal family, and are, really quite critical of him, and particularly Meghan, who they blame for her taking him away. But this is kind of the direction that William needs to go, into the family heritage and the family wealth, and the royal life, having that north node in the eighth house. I mean, that's how we could interpret that. And then back to, again, Harry's north node actually ends up in his fifth house.
Mm-hmm.
I can't see right here, but into home and family. And that's where he needs to go. That's the intention for his lifetime.
Yeah, yeah, that, even though it doesn't seem like the best thing, when you look at Harry's chart, you realize it's the best thing for him to kind of move away from the royal family, over here and find his own identity. And
With Jupiter having that connection, I mean, there's usually tension in that opposition
mhm,
aspect. But I think any aspect from Jupiter, there is some positivity there as well. But in general, would you say that there's tension, and particularly because of the Jupiter being in its fall,
yeah.
not as strong as giving William that extra benefic support?
Yeah, and you can see that, William wants Harry to be part of the fold, to come into the family, to kind of conform and be part of the tribe. And so he doesn't really see Harry other than as who he wants him to be. And then Harry's standing over here looking at William, thinking, well, he's got everything here, he's got everything kind of locked up, arranged for him. What's left for me? Oh, well, I need to kind of distance myself and start creating my own life. Because I don't want to stand here a reflection of my brother, that opposition. I want to stay as an individual. I want to be me, instead of just the younger brother. It would be kind of frustrating, don't you think, to always be known as the brother? Which might be another aspect of that Jupiter in his first house in its fall.
It'll be interesting. You mentioned, Harry's writing this memoir,
Mhm.
and supposedly he's going to be telling many things that people don't know about his growing up experiences. So it'll be very interesting to hear if he mentions any of that.
Yeah, I know we'll be fascinated after looking at their synastry. Yeah, and then the other thing, which I think kind of reinforces the what we've been talking about, is Harry's Pluto right on William's Jupiter. I don't know what can we see there.
Well, to me, actually, Harry's actions are also helping transform William's claim to the throne and his destiny.
Yeah, because William has that Jupiter conjunct his midheaven in Scorpio.
Right. And so to me, I see that, Pluto can create difficulties, but the ultimate goal is to transform. And to me, my sense of William and Harry is that, and what I think we talked about earlier was, William was not necessarily thrilled about being the leader, and with that Cancer energy, I can see that he was, sensitive about that. And Diana always said he wanted to be more private. So in a way, Harry's kind of like giving him the independence to be like, okay, you can't rely on me anymore.
I like that. Yeah.
Behind you, that you need to take your own authority
Mhm.
and be a leader. And
I love that. Yeah.
so
Yeah, because you think of that Pluto coming to his midheaven and Jupiter as he's kind of a force that William's relying on. And then you think about Pluto can ghost. It can be, it can just disappear. And that's kind of what Harry's done to William. And so through that act, he's transforming the role William is playing. He has to rely more on himself, without the brother there to support him. Because, I think we know this just from watching them. Harry is just like a real dynamo. Just a warm personality that people enjoy having around. And it probably was a great sense of loss for William to not have that there.
well, I often think too of it was William, Kate, and Harry, and in their media appearances and their involvement in that mental health
Mm-hmm.
initiative and charitable work that they put together. but it was sort of like, yeah, again, how do you feel like Kate obviously seemed very inclusive of Harry and was very nice to him. And he was kind of like maybe a brother to her, but still you would feel a little bit like the third wheel
Yeah.
in those situations.
Yeah. So they probably enjoyed having him around tremendously, but
For
for him,
sure.
it's
Yeah.
just like, feeling just like, well, like you say, a third wheel that, where's my wife? Where's my children? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So before we look at the transits to the synastry points, we should talk a little bit about the signatures for women in their charts, because that women are strong influences in their lives is kind of all over both these charts, don't you think?
Yeah, so we would look at the moon as more the mother,
Hmm.
and wouldn't we?
Yeah, yeah. And then the family, the children, how you
Mhm.
feel about your family.
Um, and then I think William too. I mean, I think everybody has a different experience of their mother, even if your sibling has the same mother, but they have a different experience
Hmm.
of each parent, right? So I remember reading things about that, you know, William was almost more of a support to Diana in a way. She could be fairly emotional, according
Hmm.
to, what I've read at times. And William was, you know, more of a support person, where maybe Harry had a different experience of a more stable
Hmm.
mothering experience, and probably William had to do certain things and interact with Charles and the Queen a little bit more, and so he was off doing that, where Diana was sort of particularly in his early years, more of the stable mom and trying to promote Harry.
Hmm.
And so to me, that's kind of the interpretation, the difference in a way between the moon and Cancer and Williams.
Mm, yeah, yeah, that he had to take more of a protective role towards his mother, William.
And do you remember, when she was divorced, when Diana was divorced from Charles, that they took away her Royal Highness title or something?
Yeah.
You remember hearing that William said, "Well, when I'm king, Mummy, I'll give it back to
Oh,
you."
did he? Aw, aw.
Yeah, so I think she did rely on him quite a bit
Mm,
for that support.
yeah. And so that moon in its own sign, but notice it's eclipsed, it's under the beams of the sun, and it was during an eclipse. So that moon kind of his mother disappearing from his life.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
But then Harry, of course, just really enjoyed his beautiful mother who was fun and played with him. It's in his fifth house. And so you can see that there is kind of a difference there. But interestingly, Harry, had Saturn
Saturn opposing.
opposing it.
Yeah. So
So
there.
there's a signature of loss there in his chart. So yeah, so both boys, would see their mother in very positive ways. What about the Venuses? Talking about the wives in their chart.
So let's see. So yeah, so there's William's Venus right there in Taurus,
Hmm.
but and then Harry's is in Libra. So they're actually in conjunct, right? Or
Right, yeah. So kind of signals that the two wives might not really connect with each other because they're both ruled by Venus, so they're both, very interested in Venus things, making a good marriage and connections, and um, they would value their marriage with strong Venuses, but they would be so very different.
right. Both beautiful, obviously. But yeah, it looks like, Harry with Megan, I think she must bring in more of that social airiness to Harry because he is so earthy,
Yeah.
and probably some social connections that he wouldn't normally have, and that kind of vibrancy uh,
Hmm.
to me is kind of what he's looking for, a more social,
Mhm.
perhaps. And then with William, and his is definitely in the sixth house, right? His Venus.
Right, yeah.
So he probably likes a helpmate as well as
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, like a coworker.
right. And she has to handle a lot of duties
Mhm.
and supporting him with the family and taking care of the home fires and with their three children, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah, because he has to be away a lot, and so, relying on somebody who's stable, he knows is going to be there. Um, yeah, so both of them were looking for, a wife that they could love very much. They were very committed to marriage, but looking for very different things, and so they ended up with very different women uh, in their chart. And then also, if we look at the signature for the partner in each chart, in William's chart, the signature is Mercury, and it's of course, in Gemini in the seventh house. So
So he
that kind of
wants
goes back to looking
to
for.
communicate with. Oh, I'm sorry, Sally. What did you say?
So that kind of goes back to what you were saying. He was looking for more of a intellectual companion that he could talk about things with, that he could share experiences with. And then Harry, his signature is the moon for his wife. And so he's looking for,
Well, the Venus.
well, his seventh house cusp
Oh, I see. Yes,
is
yes,
ruled by the
correct.
moon. So again, looking for someone that he could, just, I don't know, what would you say, a moon in Taurus, looking for
Well,
someone to build a
stability,
home with?
yeah. I mean, you mentioned stability earlier, and I mean, I think they were both looking for some stability in their partners because I think they lost that to a certain extent when their mother died.
Yeah, yeah. So that family they lost, they're
And
trying to
and
find.
more and warmth.
Mhm.
Taurus, you always feel is, warmth. And I think Megan talks about cooking. She's interested in cooking, and they have chickens,
Yeah.
Montecito, and
She's Cancer rising, right? So,
Cancer rising. So yeah, so he does like that, and it is um Earth, it's Earth sign, and he's
yeah. So he was looking for someone who was beautiful on his arm
oh,
and
there you
could
go.
cook.
It can cook. That's pretty much what everybody
I know. And
right.
it's and then we can see the signature for Kate is this Mercury, and the signature for um, Megan is the moon, and you can see they're an aversion to each other.
Mm-hmm.
They're both strong, but they just don't connect. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it, how you can see things about other people in their lives by looking at just their own chart.
That's really interesting.
Okay, so let's look at transits to answer the question, like what's going on with them now, and will they ever patch things up? And so we'll set up a tri-wheel, and I thought I would just use the date of the Queen's passing um, to, and then we can kind of imagine the aspects moving forward after that. And let's see, I need the tri-wheel. Okay, so should we do William on the inside, Harry in the middle, and then the passing of Queen Elizabeth on the outside? Okay, so does that show up all right?
Yes.
Okay, and so mark real quickly some of the points that we were looking at.
So you mentioned Mars and Gemini at the beginning of our discussion here, and
So they're
so
squared Marses.
well, I was just looking at the transiting
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Mars in Gemini is really setting off
their Mercuries.
that Mercury squaring.
Yeah.
And this unfortunately is going to be lasting, I think, until next February or March.
Yeah, it's a very unusually long Mars transit in Gemini.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that would portend, some still difficulties
And
when
we see Mars over here.
it's not going to be quickly resolved.
Yeah, I would think, especially, is Harry's book due to come out?
Yeah, there was some discussion that it was supposed to come out this fall, and then it was delayed because he wanted to add a chapter about the Queen's funeral and so on. But I'm not really sure. It seemed like maybe next year sometime though. I believe.
Okay, so probably next spring, right? When Mars is finishing up in Gemini, it might be coming out.
That would be a good prediction.
Just to put a bow on what they've been going through. So
Mhm.
yeah, Mars is definitely just kind of shaking up things between them right now. And like John Marcusella said, it's the brothers are big in the news right now.
Mhm.
And so these are some of the most well-known brothers in the world. And it's kind of interesting too, isn't it? Like you said, how everyone sort of expects that brothers are just like Harry and William are just going to be like, I don't know, hanging out all the time. And
Forever.
yeah, I mean, how many grown-up people spend, like every weekend having barbecues with their siblings?
Yeah, I mean that's not.
That's not typical.
No, it's not. Yeah.
Because I think, don't you, that it's kind of a point of siblings to kind of carve out their own identities when they move away from each other?
Well, I think that's the purpose of each life, is to go in the direction to fulfill their own destinies. And, you have certain childhood experiences together, but obviously these two, because they've been so prominent in the news and so on, that people have certain expectations, and I think they, in some ways, they don't want them to grow up or grow apart, and it's just
Yeah.
a family feeling. They want them to get along, but in many families that doesn't happen, and they're probably a pretty normal family.
Yeah, I would think so, that what we're looking at is not all that atypical. In fact, Kelly Surtees said after, Harry and Meghan left the family or left the family business, that this is a story I hear from my clients all the time. That, we had a family member and they got married and all of a sudden they were off doing their own thing and they aren't interested in hanging out with family anymore. And it's, that's kind of the way of the world,
Right.
how things work.
It's kind of interesting, that so when Harry and Meghan left the royal family, or took a step back with their positions at the time in early 2020, that was in January, correct? So that was Harry's Jupiter return year, right? So he would have been 36. So I think that's kind of interesting that.
Right, in first house perfection year,
Mhm.
and Jupiter was being returning to its natal position in his first house and in fall. So feeling just the limitations of the situation they were in. And they went through kind of a scary situation too. When they first moved away, they didn't have the security of the royal family, and they had to kind of scramble to find that, like physical security.
So it wasn't easy using that, Jupiter energy and for his return, but that would be another signature for this
Mhm.
change
Yeah.
that he needed to make. So, and then of course Uranus has been, transiting, excuse me, all those Taurus planets that, are the two main planets that both William and Harry have.
Yeah. So this Uranus transit, this when you've got two planets in synastry, and a transit comes to it, it really rattles that connection between you, especially with Uranus. And so it's going over Harry's moon, and it's going over William's Venus, Chiron, eventually. It's working in that direction. And what's Saturn doing at the same time? But squaring it. So that Uranus Saturn square that we've all been dealing with through 2021 and 2022 has really been hitting that bond they have between William's Venus and Harry's moon. So it's kind of shaking it here with Uranus, and then Saturn, I don't know, Saturn squaring it. How do you think that's manifested? It's kind of like putting it in a pressure cooker or something.
Well, yeah, because they're it's sort of the opposite energies in a way. I mean, Saturn wants to sort of keep things more structured, stable, and Uranus wants to kind of break things up. So
Mhm.
that would be a very, it is tense.
Yeah, and I think this, Uranus is showing that they're each individuating, going their own directions, especially, because of the women in their lives. Kate and Megan, are such different people and drawing them in such different directions. So Uranus is shaking that up, but Saturn's down here saying, you guys still need to act like you're a family. You need to be at all these formal events and appear as brothers. And so that's kind of interesting how, in one sense, they're sort of breaking apart. But on the other hand, you think about that Saturn Aquarius kind of society saying you need to still be appearing together at these events. And then it ends up being just kind of a very awkward situation, like it's been when they've appeared together at the Jubilee and then at the Queen's funeral. And so
with it being in the third house there,
yes, William's third
William's
house.
third house, do you think William would be a little bit more hurt in that way, or it would make a stronger impact on him? Or
Yeah, and that's his sibling house too. So that's a good point. Yeah, that could be he's just reacting to the whole situation of Harry breaking free by just trying to just push him into conforming to what he thinks he should be.
Mhm.
In fact, wasn't it William who said to Harry that they should go out and talk to people before the Queen's funeral, and the four of them went out? And
Yeah, I mean, obviously Harry was invited by somebody. If the direction came from Charles, I'm not really sure, through William, but it seems like there's been some amends. But you're right, just exactly what you said, to help show a presence within the royal family during the Queen's funeral and after her death, to show, hey, we still have the stable structure here, and to give those appearances as well. But they could have been sort of genuine amends, and people seem to receive it really positively. It seemed like to me, what I read, that they were happy to see the brothers together, the four of them
yeah, if
together.
you can see them in the same photo frame, everyone feels like,
Yeah.
all's right with the world.
There's a chance that they're going to patch things up.
Well, I think as we've got Saturn moving into Pisces, and it's going to eventually make a sextile to this strong connection between them, that I think that can bring some healing, don't you think?
Mhm.
And that's going to be more in 2024. I think it moves into Pisces, the early degrees of Pisces, in the spring of 2023. And so it will reach the late degrees probably later in 2024. That will cross, make a sextile to Harry's moon and to William's Venus. So I think that's going to be a positive time.
Mhm.
That something will happen, maybe that they'll just realize, okay, we need to get over ourselves, and for the sake of our families, that maybe try to work together a little bit. I think that's going to be a better sign for the world in general when we've got Saturn and Uranus working together in sextile rather than in square. That they're going to find some common ground. Pisces and Taurus can work together a lot better than Aquarius and Taurus.
Mhm.
So as Uranus crosses this moon, Venus synastry point. We'll have Saturn down here. Sometimes it's just maybe a little bit of growing up too.
Sorry about that.
With Saturn coming into more positive aspects, that they'll just kind of mature a bit and say, oh, we need to just get over whatever it is. We don't even remember what it was anymore.
I think they might remember,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that's a really good point about what you just discussed.
Yeah. So,
And then with Pluto moving into Aquarius, how do you see that?
yeah, now that's going to be kind of a more dramatic point, because before then, we're going to have Jupiter. It's slipping back into Pisces, but it's going to be setting off this opposition. It did earlier this year when it was in the early degrees of Aries down here. You can see at the Queen's funeral, it was setting off that opposition. And so I think when Jupiter comes back over this point, we might see a flare up of tensions between them, of, William kind of wanting to have the family together and continue the tradition, and Harry wanting to individuate. And
so again, when would that happen, you
so
think?
that's early next year.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have Jupiter slip back into Pisces, and then it's going to turn around at the end of the year and start moving forward. So we're going to have that Jupiter kind of emphasizing that divide between them. And it will also oppose this important point of the Venus-Saturn opposition. So I would think that there's still going to be some difficult feelings until like mid.
That might coincide with the publication of the book.
That could very well be, when you think of Jupiter would be publishing. That's a good point. Yeah. That sometime in 2023 when it comes out, didn't we say the spring?
Well, if we're looking at that Mars and Gemini leaving, then but that seems like kind of what's been talked about, perhaps.
Yeah. And so Jupiter will be at that point opposing this Venus-Saturn conjunction that they have in their chart. So that's going to be probably a tense time. But I think once Jupiter moves into Taurus, and it's going to be going over that kind of point of contact between them as we get into 2024, I think that's going to be another sign of the
Also
healing.
help, yes.
And Jupiter will actually be joining Uranus, so that could bring positive change. And with it being over the Venus moon, it could be even the women, Kate and Meghan, deciding, hey, we want our kids to know each other.
Yeah, it is curious to think about. Yeah, the grandchildren, I mean, this is they would be their first cousins.
Yeah, and there's a special bond between cousins. So I wouldn't be surprised if by 2024, Kate and Meghan are even saying, let's find a way that the kids can grow up knowing each other. And that will kind of help re-knit the bonds between the brothers. But the Pluto moving into Aquarius, that's the tricky one, because that's setting off that Pluto, Harry's Pluto and William's Jupiter midheaven, that synastry point. So it's going to be moving right down here. So that's a pretty dramatic square, don't you think?
Yes. I mean, with all the other transitory preparation, with all the other planetary energies that are prepping for this Pluto transit. I mean, a square doesn't necessarily need to be negative, but maybe that's the oomph that needs to finally get them to transform their relationship, to transform their destinies, that they are on the path and they're accepting of each other. But I don't know, they're not going to patch things up like the old days, but they have, in recognition of the fact that they're adults with their own families and their own destinies, that, that's kind of life and where they need to go.
Yeah,
So
I like that. Yeah.
I'll define now. Would that have anything to do with Charles at all? I guess we'd have to look at his chart to answer that question, but I find it really interesting to see how accepted he's going to be as king.
Yeah,
Uh, and
that could be. Yeah, because you would think that midheaven with Jupiter in Scorpio for William, um, and Harry's Pluto being there. Um, I don't know. Possibly loss of a father.
I
I
mean,
gotta
he's
think.
not that old,
No, no, he's just a few years older
but
than we are. So
I don't, obviously we don't know, but maybe hopefully their transformation would be well on its way. I mean, the transformation of their relationship
right.
would be well
Yeah,
on its way
yeah,
to.
maybe like you say, it's just they're both going to face the fact that they're not going to reunite as they were, as young boys. And Harry's never going to come back and live, with the royal family again. And so they'll kind of let some things die as far as expectations. And that, maybe Harry will accept that William's never going to be totally happy with his decisions. Um, and just, kind of learn, okay, that's just, I can deal with that and move on.
I was just thinking about the Queen of Denmark. She took away the titles of the second son's children, her grandchildren, and I guess it was very upsetting within the family. But these monarchies, they're kind of seeing the writing on the wall that they do need to streamline, and that's what Charles and William have been doing. And I think Harry just like put the ball rolling to even make more of an impetus for that, because that's something William's going to have to think about for his two other kids besides
Yeah, yeah.
George. And so I think Harry's just putting that action there, that Mars there energy there, to
Mhm.
sort of get them moving in that direction.
And that's his Pluto on William's midheaven too. Just like I'm going to help you transform the monarchy just
Right.
by going off and living my life as an ordinary person. Well, yeah, not ordinary, but
Mm.
as a non-royal person. And that's really the future. Like you say, you can't. Queen Elizabeth has a number of grandchildren. They can't go waltzing around as princes and princesses all over the place. That would just be silly.
Well, and there's not enough money in the coffers, there it's just not going to be the bigger the family, so that
Right.
are having to streamline.
And I was asking a person from the UK the other day about the royal family, and he said, "Oh, I'm so tired of hearing about them. I don't know why people in America are so interested." He said, "To us in the UK, they're like the Kardashians." I said, "Well, I guess we're interested in them because we don't have to pay for them like you guys do."
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, and historically, astrologically, they've always had the birth times available. It was the royal people that had their astrology charts done.
Right. Yeah. No one else had their birth times recorded.
Yeah. So there is kind of like that history there. But yeah, I guess we are kind of fascinated by them. But other people, not everybody is obviously, but I find them very interesting, and they're kind of symbolic of families, and
Mhm.
and I think in a way, part of the intention was for having this ideal family, but there is probably no ideal family, and that's what we've all come to discover with them. They're still human.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so we just are they're playing out the dramas that we have in our lives to lesser degrees. And what we're seeing is that they're going to settle into a very typical sibling relationship, you
Yeah.
know, as people get older, that's usually what happens. And I remember saying I was at a family funeral and saw my sister-in-law who I haven't really enjoy. And she said to me when we left, "Well, Sally, weddings and funerals." And I thought, yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to. That's when you get together, you know. And
Right. Everybody's so busy. Yeah.
yeah, and people don't live, well, a lot of times they don't even live in the same country as each other. William and Harry are a point in
Mhm.
that. So we're seeing a pretty typical story playing out. But I think as time goes by, I would predict from this that things will settle down. They'll end up at least having the bonds of knowing, that they're family and that they want their kids to know each other. And
I think that's a key point, that maybe the children will bring them together,
mhm.
because the children are going to have more similarities
Yeah, yeah.
that way, and particularly the one, the two and the two that aren't going to be the king or the queen, and yeah, so I think that's a good point. So I guess we're watching the royal family instead of watching soap operas,
I
Sally.
guess that's us. As the royal world turns, huh?
They do have very interesting signatures, and it's just really interesting to look at their strong moons and Venuses and their Mercury and their,
Yeah.
Scorpio on the midheaven, and Jupiter, and
Now, all
so
those aspects tell the story, don't they?
yeah.
Yeah. And I do like your point that Harry is really, in a sense, doing William a favor. He's kind of helping bring about some things that need to end with the royal family and beginning a new path, which I think is going to make them more viable as they go into the 21st century. If they're a little bit less, I don't know what's the right word, kingly and queenly, and a little more ordinary,
Yeah, and I mean, I think
relatable.
underneath, I think that's where William does want to go,
Mm.
and they kind of need to go.
Yeah,
Feel
yeah,
like, I have to work in my little past life thing, but I think Harry was kind of he may have been more of a leader in a past life, and just looking at the nodal axis from, his north node in the fifth house from the 11th, it's obvious that he does need to sort of give up maybe some of that recognition. And I think we saw that very obviously at the time of the funeral, when, he and his uncle Andrew were the only immediate relatives that were, served in active duty in actually wartime. Harry in Afghanistan and Andrew in the Falklands War. But yet at the Queen's funeral, they were in civilian clothing, and it was the
yeah,
Charles and William who could wear the military regalia.
yeah,
Those guys
yeah.
could not. So that's kind of ironic. And I think giving up that, I think he was patron of, or, I'm not sure what the terminology is, but head of, military branch or something. Harry had something to do with that, and he had to give that up when he gave up, being an active royal.
Hmm.
So, anyway, I think he may have had his time in a previous lifetime being the leader, and now
Ah,
it's more focused on his own goals and family and so on.
and when you think of what Harry's actually doing, in a way, he's kind of playing a leadership role.
Exactly. Yeah. And he does have a lot of good.
Just carrying the royal family into kind of the next uh, 2.0. So, and because it's Pluto, he's doing it by stealth. You don't quite see how he's,
Oh, there you go.
moving and shaking the royal family, but definitely I think they're going to be better off for him making this break.
And it takes a long time, right? Because we've certainly seen that throughout history.
Mhm.
Uh, um, what was Elizabeth's uncle? I forget it.
Oh, Edward.
King Edward, who had to give up the throne for the woman he loved. And then Margaret, who you've written about, Princess
Mhm.
Margaret, she sort of had to give up her first love because of royal duty.
Right.
And those lives were hurt by that. And so now, kind of in a way, Harry's sort of taking on that whole football or
Yeah,
baton.
yeah. And saying maybe it doesn't have to be this way anymore.
So this is another generation.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, well, this was interesting. And I think our prediction is that yes, eventually the brothers will patch things up, but it won't be the same as it was before, right?
I think
Okay.
so. I think that's a reasonable prediction.
Okay, well, we'll be back next month with some more celebrity charts to pick over. And in the meantime, we love to hear any comments and put them in the comment boxes below. So thanks very much. Bye, Sallie.
Bye, Sallie. Thank you.
Thank you.